Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I am going to ask if you can hear me. So if my fellow panelists could just give me a thumbs up, I'll know that I'm in good shape. All right. I'm Andrea Specht, and I am honored to serve as the Executive Director of the American Craft Council, and once again to welcome all of you to Craft in a Time of Tariffs, Implications and Possibilities for American Makers. For those of you who are just meeting ACC for the first time, our mission is to foster craft-centered livelihoods and ways of living. We are working to build a world where objects matter, makers thrive, and craft connects. Today's event is an example of our mission in action. I am grateful and excited to share that more than 600 people have registered to join us today. Before I introduce our moderator, I'd like to take a moment to thank our partners and collaborators in this event, the Craft Emergency Relief Fund, affectionately known as CERF Plus, and the Furniture Society. Craft is a strong community, and that was on full display as we worked together to put this event on for you today. It wouldn't be happening without the effort and the true care and concern of a number of my fellow executive directors, all of our panelists, our moderator. Thank you all so much. I also want to thank our dedicated American Craft Council Board of Trustees, led by Chair Preethi Gopinath, our talented staff, and the many ACC members and donors who make all of our work possible. Thank you to all of our panelists, as I said, whom Julie Lasky will introduce momentarily. And speaking of Julie, we are delighted that she has agreed to serve as our moderator. Julie Lasky is a journalist, editor, and critic who specializes in design, architecture, and real estate. A widely published writer, she contributes a monthly column called Living Small to the New York Times real estate section and edits the domestic and international special design report supplements produced by the New York Times. She's also a part-time assistant professor in the Industrial Design MFA program at Parsons School of Design. Julie will introduce our panelists, and she'll also share information about how to ask a question of our panel. Please be aware that we are recording this event, and we will make it available online as soon as we can for later viewing, and we'll share that information with everyone who has registered today. So with that, I'd like to thank you again all for coming. Thank you to our panelists and to Julie, and I will hand it off to Julie.
Thank you, Andrea, and welcome everybody. Such a pleasure to be here. So we're about a third of the way into the 90-day pause that the Trump administration ordered following its decision to impose extreme tariffs on much of the world, though there remains a 10% levy on nearly all global imports, plus a 145% tariff on China. Which means, of course, that no one has a clue about what is going on in our national and global economies. We just know that right now, imports from China have gotten much more expensive. The stock market is behaving like microwave popcorn, and the Grinch may be making plans to steal Christmas all over again. What does this mean for craft in America and beyond? That's the question a distinguished panel of experts will tackle this afternoon. I'm delighted to introduce the members of the group in alphabetical order. Brett Binford is a ceramicist who co-founded Mutt Shark Studios in Portland, Oregon, a company that offers production services and ceramics to artists and designers. We also have Chris Farrell, a journalist and author who is a senior economics contributor for Minnesota Public Radio, including NPR News and Marketplace. Robert Sukrachan is a furniture designer based in New York City and Chiang Mai, Thailand. Last year, he launched a design company called Pern Bon in Chiang Mai, which produces artisan-made lighting and home decor. And then Sharon Zimmerman, who is always going to be last in the list, that's in alphabetical order, is a jeweler in San Francisco who works as a small business consultant for jewelry makers and other artisans and designers under the name Sharon Z. A quick housekeeping remark for the audience before we begin, because this is such a wonderfully big crowd, we have muted you to prevent inevitable background noise, but we do want to hear from you. So if you have questions for any or all of the panelists, please put them in the chat and we will try to address them by the end of today's session. Now, on to the questions. And I want to start with our fellow reporter, Chris. For many of us who are forced to think about tariffs as something more than a word in a high school history book, what are the most important takeaways and the biggest misconceptions about them?
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's great. I love your work at the Times. And when you hear the word tariff, it's just a fancy word for a tax on imported goods. It could also be a tax on imported services. But with what the Trump administration has done is they focused on imported goods. And as Julie said, we got 145% on China. We got 10% across the board. We have this pause that's going on. And so the real result of the tariff announcements has been a deep uncertainty. And uncertainty is usually something of a cliche. I mean, it's hard to pierce the what's going to happen in the future, of course, but this really uncertainty is deep. And I think the main effect has been consumers are freezing, a lot of businesses are freezing, and people are trying to figure out what is going on. But when you hear that word tariff, it's a tax on imported goods. And the thing about why this is such a dramatic moment is that if you think about the post-World War II period, it was an 80-year period where we went for lower and lower trade barriers. And depending on whose numbers you look at, the average tariff rate of imported goods coming into the US was 2.5% to 3%, or 2 to 3%. It was in that range. And now you're talking about a baseline of 10%, and then numbers like 60% above that, 25% above that. So this is a real shift in the overall economic environment that we're all operating in.
So, Sharon, Robert, and Brett, all of you, given the uncertainties that Chris just referred to in the administration's economic policies, what short-term adjustments are you making in your businesses, if any? And just jump in there, whoever wants to go.
Sure. So the bulk of my businesses, Julie mentioned, I spent most of my work history as a jeweler, and then shifted to consulting and advising for the jewelry industry and also multiple craft industries. So within my own business, I am taking a pretty ruthless look at my monthly budget. I'm looking very hard at what the numbers are. I don't want to be surprised a few months down the road with some large bill, because things do feel very uncertain. So I'm trying to fix as many certainties in my business as I can. So if it's like looking at all of the softwares that I use and deciding like maybe I don't need all of these, I'm taking a really ruthless look. And I'm also recommitting to a lot of marketing strategies and tactics that are always part of a strong business, but I'm recommitting to them.
What kinds of marketing tactics, Sharon?
So for a number of years now, I've actually moved a lot of my business marketing away from social media, and I'm actually continuing to do that because if we look at, say, like the last recession in 2008 to 2011, I was already working in jewelry e-commerce at the time for somebody else. And one of the things that I noted is that like social media was fine, but like building relationships with people, meeting them in a way that's very helpful. So I'm recommitting to things like writing for my blog and writing like guides and how-tos and instructions. Recommitting to using YouTube because also this kind of content is always like it's evergreen, right? Like it's not as fleeting as social media can be. And so I'm trying to build it in a way that it's not just going to be strong for now, but strong for later if we do get to a more like certain time.
Brett, what do you have to say about this? What are you doing strategically at this point, given all the uncertainty? Your mute is, can you become unmuted?
Thank you. Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. It wasn't letting me. Um, we've been some of this reminds me, I guess, of COVID for us because a lot of material and labor rates changed for our company during that time. But the biggest thing that we worry about is just general supply chain stuff. So getting clay, we rely on clay and plaster. And so one of the things that we've been doing is just preemptively reaching out to suppliers. And while prices may change, I feel like we can adapt with pricing changes. Those means we have to update our prices for our clients. And sometimes that means we lose clients and hopefully we, retain as many as we can. But ultimately, what almost put us out of business a year or two after COVID was an actual lapse in the supply chain of some of our materials. if we don't have materials, we can't make our things. So proactively looking and checking in with any of your vendors to make sure your supply chain's good has been our core sort of check-in.
So could you tell the audience a little bit more about your business and what it is that you produce?
Absolutely. My apologies.
Yeah.
So our business is, we are a private label manufacturer. So we make ceramics for designers, artists, hotels, restaurants, some big brand stores, and we use molds. So we need plaster as a primary infrastructure in our studio, and yeah, we produce things via slip casting and ram pressing, which I can elaborate on a little later too when we talk about technology.
So the materials that you have been sourcing are not things that you're using locally, they're coming from other sources.
Some absolutely, yeah. So the unfortunate thing is not all the ingredients for clay are naturally occurring in the United States. So they're a clay body, so to speak, or a clay recipe. The ingredients are a byproduct of mining or are mined in different parts of the world. So those necessary ingredients can fluctuate, or availability of them can fluctuate.
Right. Now, Robert,
But in all, oh,
go ahead. Sorry,
Oh,
please.
I was just going to say, in all, as a ceramic artist, we are used to material shifting and availability of materials changing, in that we have to update recipes. A mine will run out of something and we'll adjust our recipes. And so that's another thing we look at as well.
Okay. And Robert, you're straddling cultures. You are American, but you had a Thai father, if I'm correct. You spent your childhood between both cultures. You grew up outside of Boston, lived in New York for many years, but now are you fundamentally based in Thailand?
I'm back and forth, but most of our manufacturing is here in Thailand, and we kind of have a sort of hybrid sourcing. Lighting is the main product that we make, so all the technical components are sourced and assembled in the U.S. But then the sort of more traditional craft work happens here in Thailand, so we're kind of combining those two things together. And for us, our reaction to the announcement of the tariffs kind of has two sides. The internal is sort of what do we make and how do we make it? And then the external is more the communication strategy with our customers. So internally, it was really just about doing a deep dive into the spreadsheets to understand our input costs and specifically our margins, because we could pretty quickly see that some products would become like loss leaders in the company, even with just a small increase in the tariffs, whereas others where the margins were higher, we could kind of absorb the tariffs. So focusing on selling the products that would be less affected. And then definitely trying to hold off on really capital intensive investments over the coming year in terms of trade shows and things like that until we get some more certainty about the market. But most of my energy right now is going into the customer facing side. I think that these moments of uncertainty are a really good opportunity to reconnect with our customers and just be super upfront about the volatility and setting expectations. My light bulb supplier in North Carolina sent an email last week announcing that their prices would have to go up in 2 weeks, but they were giving us an opportunity to purchase stock at the current price. I ended up buying, thousands of dollars of bulbs to get in on that. So I do think that there's opportunities to kind of use the moment to be in touch. And really what I want to focus on now is to understand the psychology of our customer, because my customers are mostly interior designers, and they're definitely having the same conversations that we're having right now, the same angst. It's just a different pain point. But we don't have a crystal ball. There's no way to understand what they're thinking without talking to them. So I'm going to be back in New York next week. It's going to be Design Week, and I'm just going to really be trying to understand what they're thinking about so that we can kind of craft our offering based around, how we can address those pain points without compromising what we're making. But without understanding that, I kind of feel like we're in the dark, because in the last month, we've definitely already seen a downturn in sales. and we haven't raised our prices. So it's like we can just guess why that's happening, but we don't know.
Right.
So
And the pain points you're referring to in your interior design customers are the fact that their clients themselves are not using their
it
services.
could be, I have many theories. I think
Mhm.
that, as someone who supplies lighting and furniture, those are kind of end of cycle purchases. And I think that they're part of an overall budget. And the cost to build a house is going to skyrocket primarily because of the lumber increases from, Canada. And so if people are concerned about those big things, I think it's going to push back purchases on sort of the more decorative objects. And I just think there's a wait and see attitude right now. But I don't know. That's me surmising that. And so I want to try and get more of the data. So really communication is like the main thing that we're focused on right now.
So, Brett and Sharon, Robert mentioned that one of the things that he's putting on hold right now in response to this situation is not engaging as much in trade shows. Are there plans that you had made that you have now canceled or postponed as a result of the situation?
We didn't have any big like growth plans or big shifts in business model planned, but I definitely wanted to kind of second um, Robert's advice on any large capital expenditures. We're holding on to any liquidity that we have in the case that a downturn results in some how would I say running in the red for a few months or longer. Having some money set aside helps us get through times like that.
Sharon, what
I,
about you?
so at the moment, I am not planning on putting anything on hold necessarily. I think there was one plan I had in place that might be delayed. I actually did have a plan in place to increase my prices and look for some other kinds of businesses, but I actually think that maintaining my focus on the jewelry industry and craft industries right now is the right place to be for me. I wouldn't say that I'm really putting the plan on hold. I think I'm just maybe it's a next year plan, but it was certainly and certainly like late last year I started looking kind of like Brett and Robert alluded to. I looked ahead at my budget and I decided there were some expenses I didn't make last year so that I would have a cushion for this year because I was looking ahead and seeing some troubling signs. So but nothing specific. There's a conference I'm going to for the industry coming up in October and I'm still planning on attending.
Right.
So yeah.
So there, Sharon, I wanted to throw another one at you, which is that you
Sure.
said you've been getting lots of questions from your consulting clients since you do small business consulting.
Mhm.
And I was wondering, what advice are you giving them that would be helpful to the attendees of this panel? Are there any
Sure.
facets of the current situation that we can leverage or that we can be mindful of as
Yeah.
we move through it? And apologies for my buzzer.
Yeah, it's okay. My clients have come to me with some significant concerns that I might even share. And because the focus of a lot of my consulting is on pricing and pricing strategy, that tends to be the core of what we talk about because pricing intersects, of course, like we're all craftspeople. It's all about your cost to start with, and then there's all of this other stuff that goes into it, like branding, consumer perception, psychological price breaks, right? Like there's all of this stuff that goes into it. And in the past, I have found myself recommending to most of my clients that they do a full pricing audit once a year. Once a year was usually fine. The jewelry industry is currently being hit with not the tariffs are going to have an impact on us, obviously. Brett alluded to the fact that in ceramics, there's a lot of stuff that is just simply not mined in the United States. The jewelry industry certainly has that in spades. The jewelry industry, I often say, has been a global industry since its very beginnings. It's always been a part of trade, but we are also being hit with absolute, like astonishingly record high gold prices. Gold is $1,000 more an ounce than it was at the same time last year. So we were already dealing with some really big pricing issues and having to adjust, say, the amount of materials used, the types of materials used. And so one of the things that I've been working with a lot of my clients on is, do you actually know your profit margin per piece? Can you absorb another 10% on tariffs if you have to order sapphires from Thailand or Sri Lanka? Can you absorb the extra gold prices? Do you have to raise your prices right now? Do you need a different clientele? Do you need to start accepting custom and repair work? it's very much been about recommending that they stay somewhat open and flexible to other possibilities for their businesses to kind of weather this time. And for better or for worse, I was already working in the jewelry industry during the last recession, so I had an opportunity to see a lot of ways that worked up close. But the other thing, and I alluded to this earlier, is really drilling down and maintaining those relationships with your clientele. And with your wholesale accounts. So like if you're an artist and you're selling to galleries and stores, now is a good time to be reaching out, and not necessarily in a transactional way, but in a how can we do this together way. Are you struggling? Are you not struggling? What are you seeing? Right. So maintaining those relationships has become, it's always important. Like we're all in craft. We all know what community does to us and does for us. But it's never been more important than now. And so developing those relationships, maintaining those relationships has been just vital for most of my clients. And they learn a lot too from their accounts.
Thank you. Somebody just commented on the chat and said, I would love to learn about your current pain points after the New York Design Show. So are you guys planning on attending, going to be part of New York Design Week?
I go every year. We did ICFF last year. This year I'm just gonna be there. I mean, there's a lot of things happening. If there was some way, if I can share in a couple weeks, what I find, I'd be happy to find a way to do that. But yeah, I'll be at the major trade shows, and there's just a lot of other openings and events happening, and we'll be bumping into customers. Yeah, and so I'm hoping to gather as much information as I can. So
Right. Chris, I wanted to ask you, you've written about the impact of tariffs on the creative economy. How could you see tariffs affecting craftspeople in particular?
Oh, I think it's going to have a fairly large impact just by the conversation that we're having right here in terms of so much of craft involves imported goods, raising of prices. A lot of this conversation echoes a reporting trip I made up to the Canadian Minnesota border, Grand Marais, which is an artist community, very much a craft community on the Minnesota side, and then Thunder Bay on the Canadian side. And much of the conversation echoes what we're talking about here, that this is unnecessary. This is something that has come from left field or right field, wherever you want to say. But businesses are adjusting, and they're forging new relationships. They're thinking about new pricing, going back to the basics, like Sharon was saying, some of those fundamentals. And one of the sad things about this conversation that was up in Thunder Bay was breaking established relationships in order to forge new relationships that didn't involve tariffs. So forging a direct relationship that would go with Europe, a direct relationship to go with China, direct relationships within the Canadian border. And this also involved a lot of crafts, because the United States, in a sense, the way it was described to me by one craftsperson is a lot of stuff comes into the United States and then gets distributed elsewhere, including Canada. Now they're making those changes. But I think the other thing I just want to say, what Robert was saying, I think that is important, is everyone's being cautious right now. So on the one hand, you're going back to the basics, you're forging new relationships, you're trying to think about your pricing strategy. But on the other hand, you don't want too much money going out. And this isn't a time where people are going to be taking risks. So I think the craft industry is going to go through a period of adjustment, but it's an industry that will pivot. I just been noticing salvage yards are doing really well, and recycling yards are doing really well. And, I have a feeling that materials are going to change, and there are going to be new materials there's going to be adjustments that are going on. So it's an unnecessary adjustment that's going on. But what is remarkable is how quick the adjustment is being made.
So once again, we're very much back into the days of the pandemic, where when the supply chain became disrupted, people became much more interested in, say, vintage furniture, because it was something they could have, and their aesthetic adjusted as a result of that. But you raised the question, Chris, which I wanted to ask the designers amongst us. are you considering actually making changes in materials? I mean, Sharon, are you thinking about how you make jewelry without gold right now?
Yes.
And Robert, I'm interested that your lighting is a lot of it is being sourced from the States because China is such a major supplier of that, of the components. But are you thinking about, with your North Carolina suppliers, changing the mode of lighting that you're doing?
I mean, for us, there's the components that we make here in Thailand that will not change because it's part of the DNA of our company is trying to connect craft between the US and Thailand, my two homes. But the point that you make about the things that we source in the US, none of that is made in the US. It is literally not possible to buy anything that is a technical component that goes into lighting unless it's like hand machine brass components that is made in the US. So no, we can't change that. We purchase all of our lighting components from Grand Brass, who supplies pretty much all of the small scale lighting manufacturers in the US. They have the best selection. Their prices have already gone up about 30% because we just placed a huge order. And it's still the best product at the best price. That will not change. And if somehow production of those things could shift to the US, that also wouldn't change because it wouldn't become a better product and it would probably cost 5 times more. So for certain things, there is no alternative. So unfortunately, we just kind of have to stomach it unless we just want to completely change our product or what we make and just stop making certain things. But the kind of hidden part here is that we benefit so much from having access to really well-made and really efficiently made inputs into our product because it allows us to focus on like the creativity, the innovation, the craft, rather than on, how can I make a socket myself or something like that? Or how can we source that in the US? If you're stuck in the weeds on that thing, you can't innovate. And so we've benefited so much as craftspeople or as designers by having access to things that are made well at good prices. And now there's going to be this like wrench thrown into the works, which, unfortunately, I think is just going to, provide friction for every step of the buying process. So,
Right.
yeah,
Sharon,
that's
oh, I'm sorry, Robert, that was, yeah. So I saw Sharon nodding along, so I wanted to bring her in
Yeah.
as well.
From the jewelry perspective, like there aren't great true alternatives to gold. Like if you're going shopping for a wedding ring or engagement ring, you're very likely to still want the precious metal. So nobody's going to convince you to get a wedding ring in bronze or gold fill because they're not as lasting, right? Where I have seen a big shift, because I just did some spot check pricing with a client not too long ago, is that if you were a consumer thinking about white gold, right now platinum is coming in at less in a lot of cases, not every case, but a lot. And so you might the issue there is that it brings in a totally different skill set. Platinum's a pretty significantly different metal to work with than gold. And so what I could see happening is a lot of people in my industry needing to take their skills to another level, to try to learn this material that it's not a new material, but it's a new to them material because it's slightly more complex to work in. But it was interesting to go through that exercise with someone and really spot check the pricing and learn that like this metal that has almost always been resulted in jewelry more expensive than gold is now not. Now, on the opposite end of things, I do think that you're going to start seeing more like demi-fine jewelry. So you will see more gold vermeil, more gold fill, even though those prices will also go up because they still involve gold. And I could see a resurgence in bronze as well. So I think we are going to see some slightly different materials, but there's still going to be those like hard points that like consumers, like when Robert was talking about, like there's only a certain way you can make these things at a certain quality. And for a significant portion of the jewelry industry, the consumers just won't accept actual cheaper materials for what they want.
Brett, as a supplier of production service and materials for other makers, are you giving new thought to the kind or quantity of technology that you're employing? Are you shifting your marketing strategies as well?
Yeah, we've to kind of maybe give a little backdrop on on some of the arc of our company was we at one point had grown our company to 35 employees, and we reached this scale where we were considering more excuse me, automation, things like that. But what we found as a company of that scale was we became less and less nimble. The clients we were looking for were clients that would only order in the thousands to maintain enough work for that large of a team. Since COVID, as we've pared down the company to more of a core group of makers, it's allowed us more nimbleness. It's reopened our customer base to smaller designers and craft artists, where maybe their entry point into the market might be wanting to produce 100 of something to sort of test the market. It's allowed that shrinking has also allowed the types of projects for us to do to also be, how would I put it, kind of more niche. Or one of the words I try and use with a lot of my clients is like, are we making something that's heirloom quality? And as we see, my perspective is, as we see general consumption decrease, I feel like the things that, aside from the necessities, of course, the things that are going to continue to be purchased are things that people feel will last a long time, or if it's an object that represents them a long time, or the story of that object. To briefly just touch on technology, I mean, one of the big things that's affected our field was 3D printing, because it's really changed the marketplace in that prior to 3D printing, our clients were already makers. They were already making a product, and then they saw sales that required or that led them on the path to seek out help, someone else to manufacture for them. The neat thing with these with 3D printing is we're finding our client base is much more diverse, because basically anyone with an idea can take that to someone that's affluent with 3D rendering skills, and they can provide us with an idea that we can then visually quote much easier, as well as 3D print to create the original that we then work from. Marketing strategies, when I heard the folks talking about maybe a downturn in some of these trade shows, that's something that does feel a little scary for us, because Mudshark, we've never actually really had a marketing budget or plan. Really, our marketing has been done by our customers. For example, a customer goes to one of these shows and they're telling the story of their product, and they say it's made in Portland, Oregon. They tell whatever layers of information and storytelling around who we are and what we do here. And then other makers are at that same show and see them and say, hey, that's a pretty cool object. Are you making that? Oh, no, I hired these guys out in Portland. So it works. We would see a big influx in orders from both our clients that were having successful sales, as well as new clients that were going to those shows and seeing some of our existing clients. So that adds a little potential disruption to what we're doing.
But is it safe to say that, or fair to say that your strategy already of pulling back a bit in the scope and scale of your business is something that is insulating you from the economy right now, because you have a smaller scale business that seems to be a little bit more local?
Absolutely. And I think that I hesitate to use the word like trickle down effect, but I think some of these, when I think of these price changes and tariffs and influx, slowdown in consumption, I think the larger the entity, the more it will impact, versus the smaller, or like individual crafters, for example, are way more nimble with pivoting and coming up with new ideas than a company of 35. And when we were pivoting during COVID quite a bit, there were a lot of things that led us to decide that a smaller core group was a better path forward. But ultimately, it leads to us being potentially more nimble and being able to work with smaller clients, which I wanted to make a point going back to.
going to wait for you to unfreeze.
Someone mentioned recession companies' growth. We saw a giant influx in companies. It was that maybe had lost a job or their income was less regular, and so they were going on their own, saying, "What can I do? I should design. I'm going to start my own company. I'm going to design something." And so we saw, and that coupled with the technology of 3D rendering, kind of gave them a pathway to be able to engage with us and start a business. So in some of these times when I think things are uncertain, I also think of it as people leaving maybe that traditional career path and saying, I'm going to follow that thing that I love to do, and grow with that.
And we're going to talk a little bit more about silver linings like that, the kind of nimbleness that seems to be produced by these trying experiences. But speaking of trying, Robert, I wanted to know if you could elaborate on a comment you made on Instagram that the administration's protectionism demonizes offshore human labor, and at least those who produce in Asia in partnership with American small businesses.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of in response to a lot of the discourse right after the announcement of the tariffs. I kept seeing this word cheap being thrown around a lot, cheap labor, cheap materials, cheap prices for the end consumer, which really framed everything about overseas manufacturing being about economics. And for me personally, that just has never been the case. It's sort of my personal story that brought me to working with the craftspeople that we work with in Thailand. And we work with them because they bring a rich material heritage or a special skill set or creative possibilities that we couldn't achieve on our own. It's kind of like what I was saying before. Also, if we apply the same logic to the product that we're buying, that's a lighting component. It's not just that that thing is being made cheaper. It's being made better and more efficiently many times in ways that benefits us. And so, sometimes the discourse around tariffs is so reductive. It's just like labor in one place being cheaper than labor in another, but it's just not the case anymore. The technological advancements in countries outside of the US are things that we could never catch up to, even if we tried to now, because they're light years ahead of us. I mean, I make furniture here in Thailand as well, and I can't compete with anything that's made in China because they're so much more automated, so much more technological than anything that we could do here, even when the labor costs are roughly the same. So it's just such a more complicated issue than it's often made out to be coming from the administration. So yeah, it's frustrating, but
Yes, it ignores the interconnectedness. Yeah, Brett.
Oh, I just kind of wanted to agree with you somewhere in the air, Robert, that for years as an American manufacturer, I think I used to have that sentiment of like, if you're not, it's us versus them, right? If you're not providing keeping keeping that manufacturing in the United States. And that all changed when I went on a small visit, a tour through China, and saw really the depth of craftsmanship and some of it generational knowledge, and just how they made things was just as innovative, or if not more innovative than what we were trying to do here. Even as making something as simple as we may think of as a bowl or a cup. And so it really changed my perspective on that.
As we're all craftspeople here, I think it's something that we understand is there's like the language of things made through our hands that really it allows people to communicate who couldn't speak a spoken language with each other. That's actually the core of my business, is we invite craftspeople and designers from the US to come here and collaborate with traditional artisans and to learn from each other and to share. And craft and the objects that we make are a way for us to communicate with people, whether it's our customers or appreciators of the craft. And to me, it's like really important to just keep affirming those values, instead of saying that one craft is better than another based on where it's made or who's buying it. The world is just, it's not a zero-sum game is basically what it comes down to.
I just want to say, I fully agree, and I probably, like Brett, like at one point had that opinion. And then years ago, I met somebody on a bus who was working for Timbuktu, which is a bag making company here in San Francisco, and this was like almost 20 years ago. And when I talked to them about like, oh, it's so great you have your production here in San Francisco, and she said, well, actually, we have to send our laptop sleeves to China. Why? They simply have the technology to actually do this to these exact specs that we need it to be. And China has the technology. They've invested in that level of innovation to be able to make it happen. Whereas the US has not. I actually have been saying to a lot of people that there's been a lot of like commentary just out there in the world about like, oh, well, we'll get through this. We'll just buy American. And for most of us, buy American is not an answer. When other countries have like blown past us on the innovation and technology phase for decades now, like we're actually playing catch up. Like there's aspects of the jewelry industry that I don't know that we can recreate here because to what Robert was saying, it's like you have like this generational knowledge. Gujarat, India is the diamond cutting center of the world. They cut something like 90 to 95% of the global diamond volume every year. And now they have generational knowledge on how to do that. Can we replicate that here? I don't think we're at that point yet, or we're decades away from it.
And it's a very cool. You want to say? I mean, I think one of the things Robert said is incredibly important when you're thinking about international trade and particularly about the crafts. It's not a zero sum game. This is, I mean, that is like the single most important concept because it's treated as a zero sum game. If China's doing well, we're doing poorly, or vice versa. And yet it is about the gains to trade, it's about the exchange of knowledge, it's about the exchange of skill, and watching as people develop their economies, grow their crafts, get exposed to new industries, new crafts, new ways of doing business. Trade is not a zero sum game.
And I
I
just want to
would
say one thing.
go ahead.
I don't want it to make it seem like there isn't bad behavior happening and there are some things that I wish we'd do better at, pressuring China. My products are being copied like crazy by factories in China to the point where it's actually getting to the point where I can't almost sell my best-selling product anymore because their factories are copying it, they're stealing the imagery and all that stuff. So around things like intellectual property and stuff like that, I wish we would go hard on those things. It makes a lot of sense. And there are levers that could be used to pressure, around that. But when it comes to the tariffs, it's just stupidity. When we could be focusing on things that, because like Chris was saying, there can be this symbiosis that happens of ideas and innovation coming from our side, combining with, manufacturing in different places or vice versa. So yeah, just wanted to put that out there.
I think that's a great point. And I see enormous aesthetic results from that interbreeding, that connectedness of the different craft knowledges from different parts of the world. Around the turn of the 21st century, you may have remembered there was suddenly a huge decorative boom. We went from the 90s where everything was quite minimal and a lot of, white box, cementy, loft-like, at least if you were in New York, aesthetic. And all of a sudden things got quite decorative. And at one point I woke up and realized it was also when there was a boom in Indian and Chinese production and beading was cheap and all sorts of decorative handwork was suddenly extremely inexpensive. And so with both in the fashion worlds and the art and design worlds, you could see this surge. And I'm wondering, are we possibly looking at another? I mean, if these tariffs go through and if we really are constrained in how we produce, will we see a different aesthetic profile? Do you think? Do you consider that? Back to minimalism, if we ever left it.
I feel like our company's always pushed that, not with an intentional agenda other than a price point. So when clients come to us with ideas and we consult with them, when there's a lot of additions or ornate elements to an object, we try and be as transparent as we can in the quoting process. But we say, well, to use the bead as the example, each bead that's going to add a minute and a half, and so you want 75 beads on there. do you think that, at the shop rate, that's going to still make sense for you to turn around and mark up the price and be able to sell that object? And sometimes the answer is yes, and those are the high end, low volume type clients. But oftentimes we might get a client that comes to us with jokingly the 75 beads on an object, and we might be talking them down to how many beads do you really need to get your point across, maybe, or to use the bead analogy. But where can we simplify and still get the same intention or message that the designer's trying to convey?
I don't think that for products that are made in the US that you'd really see an effect in that way. As someone who had like a solo woodworking practice in New York for 10 years, I mean, there weren't very many materials that were like so exotic or so crazy that it would affect my sort of designs or output if there were tariffs. Like I'm expecting to see like kind of an across the board just like price increase on everything, even domestic lumber, for example. I remember during COVID, because wood that was coming from Canada or a lot of plywood comes from Canada and the Baltic region, the price of lumber was going up, and then all the domestic prices went up as well, just kind of in correlation with that. And it was frustrating, but it was like kind of a manageable price increase. So unless makers in the US are working with things that are just, being tariffed to like an extreme amount, I wouldn't really see a aesthetic shift personally, but it's hard to predict.
Okay. We talked a little bit about this, but I was wondering if there about the lessons learned from the pandemic and other profound historical disruptions that could be applied to this predicament.
Well, I think one thing, I'm not sure. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I mean, I do keep going back to the last recession, and it might have just been that I worked in the jewelry industry before, during, and after it, so I got to see like how that whole arc went. And there were some big differences. Like there were big differences in how goods got delivered, which we also saw again during the pandemic, right? Like it wasn't, if you couldn't go to the store, you were ordering it online. So there were a lot of places that had to suddenly like up their e-commerce game. So I don't know, because now we've already shifted how we purchase. So I'm curious to see if that shifts in any other direction. But I think you'd asked a little bit about history and like the history of aesthetics, and I keep thinking about the Dadaists, and I keep bringing this up in conversation because it was an art movement that was wild and free, and it came about because of some major global events. And I'm kind of wondering if we're going to see more weird art, which I mean, I'm hoping we see more weird art. But I think that one of the things that got hammered home for me during the last recession was that making work that is more special was one way to have that leading edge to be able to sell to people. Because if somebody's going to be looking at like the exact same thing and comparing like against like what is your leading edge at that point? And so I think it's going to be up to a lot of crafters to come up with newer ideas.
Chris, you were going to say something?
I was just going to say something building off of what Brett was saying earlier. And, there's nothing good to say about the pandemic, nothing good to say about it. But one of the surprises that came out of it is a surge in new business formation. There have been about a 25 to 30-year decline in new business formation tracked by economists. And you go through the pandemic, and pretty much starting around July of 2020, and you had a surge in new business applications. Now, not all new business applications become a business, but it is a portion of them do. And it really surged in those first 2 years, but it stayed really high. And so one of the things that I think is going to come out of this, or it appears, is to continue that more and more people are going to see the desirability of starting their own business in all the uncertainty that's going on as the algorithms become more deeply embedded in many companies, and it's hard to get a job to break your way through the algorithms. But something happened during the pandemic that involves more and more people embracing entrepreneurship broadly defined. My suspicion is that when we look back a year or two from now, we're going to find that it reinforced a trend that was already underway. And despite the opportunities to sort of like fade away, like some trends do, this one hasn't. So something fundamental has shifted in our economy. And I think that's good for the maker community.
There was a question that came in for Chris and Brett. Do you foresee factories from either China or wait, I just lost it. Where was that? Sorry. Oh, from either China or Portugal opening doors here in the US in order to leverage or as a way into domestic ceramic production and manufacturing?
I would be pretty surprised, because ultimately, and Robert, I'd be curious your perspective on this. And I think what kind of gets, has historically been demonized is just the difference in uh, pay wages. So if you're going to open a company here that relies on U.S. labor to offset what a potential tariff is, it would. I don't. If I was that person coming in from a different country, I don't think that would financially make
Who
sense.
would you hire? Could you find one location that had 100 skilled ceramicists?
Exactly. Yeah. 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 So I wouldn't worry about that. I don't, or if that's a concern from someone, it doesn't.
I think that, what Brett was saying before about being smaller makes you more nimble. It's kind of funny because Brett, you're probably the person who has the biggest business in this whole digital room right now. The rest of us, especially if we're a solo maker, you have so much more space to pivot and to be nimble and to make really rapid changes and to update your product collection super quickly. If anything, there could be a lot of opportunity right now. I'm thinking, just last week, Trump is saying, dolls are going to be 3 times more expensive during Christmas this year. Maybe people are going to spend their money elsewhere when it comes to, gift buying this holiday. And I'm sure a lot of smaller scale makers are doing gift shows and things like that. So we don't know. I mean, it could be that there's some positive sides to this for people who are making crafts in the US. For me, I really don't know what to expect in terms of the buyer's mentality. What are they looking for now? Or I don't know if they're looking for it a little bit cheaper, or like Brett was saying before, the longer lasting thing, because that's sort of two different ways to go. If you were to pivot with your business, are you trying to produce something more simple and minimal that can reach more people, or are you going to focus more in on the slightly more high end or collectible craft object for lower volume? That's what's going to take some time to figure out, which for me just goes back to like having the conversations with the customer base as much as you can.
Yeah, consumer behavior is like it's always been like somewhat unpredictable, but you could tease out certain patterns. And I think right now we have completely disrupted the consumer behavior pattern. And I think I agree with Robert. I think that's the biggest question on almost everyone's minds. We have a big craft show coming up in San Francisco in a few weeks. The trade shows happen in June and August, and I feel like I'll have a better handle on what consumers are doing after, I talk to clients and people in my industry after those shows. But I agree. I think that's the biggest point of uncertainty right now is how will the people actually open up their wallets is my biggest question.
Mhm.
Brett, you said you were looking at permaculture and regenerative agriculture practices as models for how crafters can respond to tariffs by strengthening their positions in the economy in our pre-conversation. Can you say more about the parallels and what kind of possibilities exist? And I just wanted to raise to all of you that there are quite a lot of textile and fiber people in the audience, so anything that you think pertains to their work would be very helpful.
Yeah, so in my personal world, I've been enjoying learning a lot about permaculture and just a lot of different processes and ways outside of industrial agricultural practices. But this commonality that I see in that arena, I feel like I've seen for years in in the craft community, in the maker community. And the big component there is education. And by that, I mean educating your customers. And, I think there was and I think we're still in that, but I remember, maybe in the early 2000s, where, the more you were storytelling and telling about who you are and attaching that value to an object, that it becomes part of it. What I see in the permaculture and some of these agricultural circles is also the education around returning to local, and where I think that is a real big value point to a local craftsperson that may have to charge a lot more, is aside from telling the story of them, it adds to the layers of storytelling around their intersections in the community, and maybe what's already obvious to many people, but the simple economics of it is that, and was one of the storytelling things that we're a part of for years with our client base, which is when you spend money with me, that goes, however many employees I have at the time, that goes right to them, and that goes right into the local economy. And a lot of that at that time in our company's growth was incentivized with local grants and loans, because they knew that money would be infused back into our local economy and our local tax base. So yeah, I think continuing to think of new layers of how we're sharing our stories and the value that we add, other than it just being the personal part of us, but there's local economic impact, and while it's hard to say this as a ceramic artist, but there's carbon footprint stuff. There's things choices that we make as makers and consumers that can be better and worse for the environment. So adding some of those layers, I think, could be a marketing tool, for lack of a better word.
Sharon, you're nodding. Is this something you've advised clients to do to bring more narrative?
Yeah, to kind of include, I mean, there's a lot of recommendations on marketing sides of things to, not get too political with your audience, but I actually think that that's a very personal choice that any maker needs to do. But I will say, I think craft is fairly political already. Like, we're all talking about like the global sourcing and how tariffs are impacting us. These are political issues. And so being able to tell some of those stories can feel like a political act, but I think it's actually really important to share like how a sale actually impacts you as a small craft business, how you get to source thoughtfully. Like I think about that, especially in the jewelry industry, because some of the volunteer work that I do is on the sustainable and responsible side of the industry, and really being able to tell those stories and say, I get to make this choice because I am a solo designer. I don't have to worry about whether or not this one sapphire mine that I think is good and the sapphire cutter who I think is good has to scale up, because I can just buy this one sapphire with its whole story, and I can share that story with you. And so I've been feeling more and more like those are really, really deeply important stories to tell. And I would say that especially in light of how the tariffs are likely to impact some of that responsible sourcing, and to be able to share those stories, or how the cuts to various other U.S. government departments are also going to impact some of that transparency and traceability that we all want in our materials. So that's also going to be a big impact. So yeah, I think I agree with Brett, like pulling back and telling those stories about like how it impacts you and your community are going to be very important.
But also may be challenging, because if a crafter is relying on a particular source, it's raising their prices and may not be the most, I mean, there are degrees of ethical behavior when it comes to sourcing. Maybe ethics is a luxury that some companies in America, some crafters aren't going to be able to afford. Brett,
I think that at the big level, I think that's going to be true. I think at the smaller level, it will still wind up being a pretty leading edge. Where I think it's going to impact is anybody new who's entering craft. Anybody who's starting with like a more scrappy personal budget to get started, like that's going to be a harder way to source. Somebody, I think you had asked Julie about fiber and textiles. I can actually address a little bit of that. I have worked with fiber artists Myself, I have a personal, very expensive sewing habit, so I'm very familiar with everything that people are going through with fabric sourcing and notion sourcing at the moment. What I can say right now is that if you want to buy responsibly, um, and when I say responsibly, sometimes what I'm talking about is in a way that's traceable, right? Like from the mill, from the farm, all the way to your fabric. That's likely to still come from Peru, which is currently only being hit with 10% tariffs, I believe. I know the news changes rapidly. So you're likely to have to pay 10% more. And I think that's just going to be how it is temporarily, assuming that the tariffs do fully go through. Um, and then beyond that, I mean, frankly, like China produces, like going back to the earlier conversation of China being so technologically innovative, it's why they produce, can't even remember the percentage, but it's a large amount of the world's textiles. We ship American grown cotton to China to be turned into thread to make into fabric. Right. That's how far removed we are from the process at this point. So I foresee a lot of people entering the sharing economies in the coming years. Um, I think that leveraging your community yet again and like looking to your community to see like, hey, do you have this resource? Do you have this resource? Can we trade? I actually do see like a sort of informal trade economy coming back.
Mhm.
Brett, you want to speak?
Yeah, yeah. To piggyback up that, I see a lot of trade economy stuff in the community agricultural systems. Um, but I also, a funny thing that came in kind of following some of those circles and thought leaders is just also this sense of relativity, right? When egg prices went up um, from practices from industrial egg producers, a lot of those prices helped the smaller producers justify what was already taking them probably that amount of time and money to produce, for lack of a better way to put it. So I think there's two things. Obviously, when a bunch of prices go up, I think that the fear part is that consumers will pull back. But I think there also becomes this relativity thing, and a lot of those really big companies that are, importing, you know, hundreds of thousands of things, and all those prices go way up. I don't actually foresee the individual crafters' retail prices going up in the same proportion. So I actually think in some ways there is a potential silver lining where some of that playing field is leveled. Um, I mean, even for an American company, when prices go up, I see because when we were a larger company of 30 plus, that's three managers, an office manager, a bookkeeper. There's a lot of people working on the business that aren't actually making things, and the term is like value added. Whereas when you are an individual crafter or artisan or a team of three and you are all actively making, when a price increase happens, whether it's labor or material, the way that affects your end product is much less than it would affect even an American company like ours when those prices go up. When I do the math of how much we have to increase, it in turn is much greater than someone that's running a 1 to 5 person business model.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
One thing, Sharon, somebody responded to you or built on what you were saying, that another option for jewelry sourcing is recycling dated pieces, perhaps buying out-of-date items and reusing the gemstones or gold. Is this something you're seeing a lot of?
I think it's so to backtrack just a little bit, for a lot of people who work in fine jewelry, recycling is that, or actually should say repurposing is actually just a normal part of what we do anyway. Recycling actually has a little bit of a controversial definition in the jewelry industry because gold and diamond and sapphires, like, they don't get thrown away, so you're not actually keeping them out of the waste stream in jewelry. You're always repurposing and reusing. What I do foresee happening is more people, rather than say coming to a jeweler and saying, I would like a brand new engagement ring, get me this diamond, get me all of this thing. I think it's more likely that somebody's going to come in with grandma's old ring and say, what can we do with this? And I've actually already seen amongst my clients who already had, say, like a custom business in place anyway, being able to more easily say yes to those jobs that maybe take in gold and give you scrap credit. Not all jewelers are actually set up to fully recycle the gold on site, so some still have to send it to refiners. But a lot of times, like so long as a diamond is still intact, so long as a sapphire or a ruby is still intact, a lot of times those can be reused. Actually, when I was doing production jewelry full time by myself, that was actually a core part of my business, was repurposing. But I think I actually don't think, I already know that I've seen it happen more frequently. And one fun fact I'll share with you is that most of the world's gold stores are actually in people's jewelry boxes. It's not the entirety. Like a lot of it's also stored as like gold bars in places, but a lot of the gold that is above ground actually already exists as jewelry. So chances are if you have like, you know, stuff that you've inherited and you don't wear, like now is a great time to turn it in and turn it into something else.
Or sell it.
Or sell it. Yeah.
The
The
price of
scrap
gold.
value of gold actually just like a quick lesson. So a lot of times if you do go to sell it at like a pawn shop or like a refiner, you're only going to get scrap credit. It's just that right now scrap credit is so high.
Sharon was talking about, oh, I'm sorry, blah. We have been talking about the idea of certain strategies that are useful for crafters in America and a business practice that could be inspirational. And I just wanted to know, elaborate on that, like furniture collectives that share resources to keep costs down, or the fact that many furniture makers have long made a fact of sourcing locally. The question is, have crafters already established all the strategies that really pertain to this moment in history? And is this something that they just have got the muscle memory to exert and work on? Can we look at this as crafters are probably in a leading position to be able to exploit the situation they have? We've talked around this, but I'd love to direct this head on.
Yeah, I mean, I live in one of the most expensive markets in the country, San Francisco. And for decades, actually, since I moved here almost 20 years ago, there have long been lots of cooperative art spaces. For years, my studio was in a shared space with like 20 other people. I think that that's where we shared a lot of the big tools. So I think I actually have been thinking about this a lot. Amongst like my circle of friends, we often talk about like building your apocalypse team, right? And you always want the makers on your apocalypse team because they're going to know how to rebuild, right? And so I've been thinking about that a lot, about how so many of us have these like really scrappy skills to be able to make things, right? And we have the skills already to build community. Most of us came to this because of community. Most people, I'm assuming, came to this call today because you want to feel that sense of camaraderie. And I think that there's never been a better time to leverage that.
Yeah, in my experience, when I had my first furniture business, every shop that I ever worked in was a co-op, anywhere from 6 to 10 businesses. As a woodworker, your primary expense is in the machinery. It's not in the lumber. And I mean, the machinery costs just dwarf everything else. So that ability for makers to share resources like that, I think is really key. I don't know if that applies as much to other crafts. But I also just think that we got to remember the things that are not changing right now. It's the ecosystem and the community still exists. The academia, I mean, I studied and then taught at a school in Maine called Center for Furniture Craftsmanship, which is a place that builds community around woodworking, and that will continue. And there's so much kind of like networking, and this person met here and then they work for that person, or then they join this shop. So all of the ways that those sort of tentacles spread within the crafts community, in my sort of estimation, are not going anywhere. So I think there is going to be resiliency that comes from that. As far as like, putting money together to buy materials and things like that, I don't know how that would work, but I think there's the kind of human support structure within the craft community that I've always found to be very strong.
Brett, what do you think?
I was echoing there my sentiment with Robert, and maybe I'll just add from a clay perspective. I see some organizations that do some group buys. I see that happening, but I also have seen that happening. Um, for I'm trying to think how long the Potters Association here has been around, probably 40 plus years. So they've always been thinking about how can we get our material for less. Um, Sharon, we've been seeing a lot, up here as well, a lot of community studios and I going back to that education component and like how we think of the layers of community is I ran a ceramics gallery for 12 years, and with the influx of a lot of these community students, be specific, I guess, ceramic community studios where people were learning how to make, and some of those blossomed into businesses, but others just it created a connection with the material and or an understanding of what maybe a more lifelong or established artist, really what it took that person to hone their craft.
And
And
those people become customers too. It's
that's what
interesting.
I, yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I was getting at.
The working world, the people who
Yeah.
buy fine furniture are oftentimes people who are just like woodworkers themselves who
Yes.
have
Absolutely.
I used to run metalsmithing workshops in my studio, and I sometimes had students just buy my work, and I'm like, "You just learned how to make this, but thank you. I'm not going to say no." But yeah, it was amazing how often, it's like sometimes we talk about we're all passing the same $20 bill around.
Yeah.
In the crafting community, like you go to an art fair or a craft show, and it's like everybody's buying from each other or trading with each other, and it's a really it creates just like great feelings all around.
I mean, the core is the maintenance of the appreciation and love for craft, right? That's what got us all started in this. And as long as that continues, I think that's gonna provide the sort of foundation to adapt to the challenges.
And I also think of it as a way of like being able to continue that like institutional memory of skill. It was actually the thing that I thought about the most at the start of the pandemic when everything was shut down and I had to stop all of my classes. Like, but do we lose skill during this time? Are we missing out on like some crafting element that we're not going to be able to pick back up? And it was on my mind a lot. So I love that. I love to hear that Portland's got an influx of those group studio spaces. It's amazing.
Chris, from where you're sitting, is my suggestion a Pollyanna thing that there's something there's built-in resilience in the just nature of being a crafter and working locally and having support systems?
Not at all. And I mean, my exposure here in the Twin Cities and Minnesota, I mean, a very strong artisan craft community. And I think there are two keys there. One is the shared knowledge. So it's about sharing. People are very generous with sharing knowledge. How do you price something? What is the market? Sharing some costs. The using machinery that's expensive, but making it in a way that other people can use it. I mean, that sharing of knowledge is incredibly important. The other thing is, and I don't need to tell you this, most people don't make money hand over fist in the craft community. It's a love. It's something that you do that you want to make enough money that you can continue to do what you love to do. And so, in a way, the craft community is always living in hard times. What may be driving the hard times can be different. This time, it's the tariffs. Hopefully, the tariffs evaporate, they disappear, but it's going to be something else. So, whenever people are living in economic circumstances where there's a certain toughness to it, mutual benefit is the way, whether with finances or it's with goods or it's services, mutual benefit is the real strength. And so I don't think that is being Pollyannish. I actually think that that is the core of why the craft community not only can get through this period of time, but is going to figure out ways to thrive. And a lot of it's going to happen through shared knowledge, shared experience, and people being quite generous with what they know.
Thank you. I'd like to open this up now. People have been commenting as you've been speaking, and I think that for some of you who commented early, maybe your questions have been addressed. So if you could just reframe a question that you would like me to pass on to the panel, I'm happy to do that. And I'm looking. Somebody had mentioned just recently the overall concern about the way that the administration seems to be just attacking enlightenment and the humanities, and how the concerns are now not just economic, but there's an entire philosophical agenda that needs to be addressed. Any thoughts? That's a huge question, and I'm so sorry just to throw it out like that. Any thoughts about that?
I'd be more scared about defunding of arts, academia, and initiatives, to be honest, in terms of the sort of long-term kind of craft apparatus in the US. Because, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people in this room right now who teach also. And that, as a craftsperson, is a viable career, potentially more so than actually selling your product for many people. And that is scary to sort of see some of like the defunding things that are potentially happening or already happening. Yeah.
I would agree that's like sorry, Robert, you
Yeah.
That's okay.
I like on my level of concern, I'm definitely concerned about the level of defunding in academia, because that is one of the many ways that people enter the arts. And I think that we're going to see a turn to a lot more like private, like I mentioned before, I used to teach metalsmithing classes in my studio. That was just like a private studio space. There are a bunch of them around the Bay Area. I think we could see a growth in that, but at the detriment of seeing a decline in academia. For my own purposes, I'm extraordinarily concerned about the cuts in government to departments like USAID. For those of you who don't know, USAID plays a huge role in things like responsible sourcing around the world, as does the Department of Labor, and they have cut staff, which cuts to NGOs that actually monitor some of the responsible sourcing that many of us are trying to do. So I have some huge concerns on that front as well.
And I was thinking there is an issue, and I do think this longer term erosion is really important about the skill and the knowledge, but there's also going to be a lot of demands on people's money, and support the craft community, support the artisans, support public media, support the arts, support the museums. And so depending on what happens in the background of the economy, things can get tough for a number of communities, because there are going to be so many demands for money, and it may not be showing up. It may be going elsewhere.
One of the participants of this, or one of the attendees, said, I work in training for artists and craftspeople. Are there any types of training and education that you think arts councils and organizations could offer at this time to assist artisans? Presumably that isn't being offered right now. Isn't quite available.
I mean, for me, when I had a small crafts business, it's like the business part was what was missing. I was like quite good at my craft, but I never learned how to have a business. So I was really lucky to have been able to attend a free 10-week course that was run by the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce. That was just allow me to actually understand finances and business. And that really was something that allowed me to finally become, more sustainable with my work. So I do think that that's sometimes the neglected side of crafts education, is like, we all love the craft so much, but if we are going to teach people something that they're going to want to make a living from, they need to be given even just sometimes a basic skill set to allow them to do that. So that was what I was missing personally from my initial career. But
yeah, same here. We were self-taught, and really fortunate for some of the programming and programs that were made available to us in our local area. So those called the IDA program was literally how we bought our first kiln to start the company, right through to working with people that helped us write business plans and eventually get a loan to get equipment to expand our business. And that's all. I'm grateful that I never went to business school, and I'm not insinuating that, because I think some if you know too much, it kind of kills the dream maybe. But I think there's a really healthy balance with coming in with the passion that we have as makers and crafters, and then balancing that with the knowledge to augment what you want to do and make it a sustainable reality for you, financially speaking.
I also backed my way into business knowledge. I took advantage of a women's business center. I think it was like a 12-week course on business planning. It also wound up being the program that I eventually started teaching for, which is how I learned even more. But I would say one of the things I actually have noted over time is that there are a lot of people in craft businesses who know certain things about business inherently and just need the language around it to kind of put it to there, because we're actually all dealing with a lot more math than I think most outsiders think that crafters are dealing with, but we actually do have a lot of math and science knowledge that you need to manage some of these crafts. So yeah, I would agree. Like having some understanding of what your business is actually doing and actually making is going to be put you in a better position.
And I think some of the organizations that do this, some of them are going to be hurt by the funding cuts. That's going
They
to happen,
already
no
are.
question. But the knowledge within the entrepreneurial community, broadly defined, is not disappearing. The desire of entrepreneurs to try and help other entrepreneurs learn the basics of, what is your business plan? How do you think about your pricing? That is not going to disappear. It may change where people get it, but that is there. And that's a real strength in every community here in the US.
Absolutely. I mean, prior to starting the company, my friend and I, my business partner and I, we both met working in a studio for another person and kind of learning, not knowing yet that we were going to start our business, but really learning the ropes of what it took to run a company. And that was, but I think there's so many, if we lost funding to that, I think there's so much mentoring that naturally happens in the crafts community that I think that'll be a sense of resilience for how we all move forward.
Another attendee asked, how do you see the tariffs affecting international sales for U.S. artists and makers, especially those who already rely on those transactions?
I think it's already impacting people. Something that I've heard from a couple of clients, because a lot of Canadians have already started boycotting American-made products, especially given like which state they are made in. I think that we're going to see a bit of a decline in international sales.
And it partially also depends what happens with, do we really get into tariff wars? And because part of the Canadian thing, which makes sense, is all this talk about 51st state and everything else going on there. So your European Union, for example, is kind of held off its retaliation. But if we really put on tariffs on the European Union, then you'd expect retaliation. And then it would have a pretty significant impact on international sales.
Mm-hmm.
One person wrote, one concern I have is the specter of liquidation of museum artifacts and sample works. How can we help prevent this movement of resources? Public museums and places are a learning place for self-teaching or progress. Well, I think that we would only be so lucky, as crafters only be so lucky to have to worry about the museums removing the objects that they make, though I'm sure that is a concern in many institutions.
Yeah, my tenure here at Portland, we watched the Museum of Contemporary Crafts close, and it's been a gap a void, excuse me, that will have a lot longer lasting effect. Kind of like what Robert was saying, if certain academics went away, it's not something we immediately feel, or we feel the loss of, but the repercussions really ripple out for years. I don't have an answer, I mean, those things just simply come down to how do we fund those things? And if they're reliant on government funding or organizations that get funded through government, that's where it feels, scary.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Pollyanna here knocking again, but I was just thinking as you were talking about, the assault that's on liberal arts education, which is such concern to so many, has been accompanied by a recognition that there was even an article in the New York Times recently, not everybody should go to college, which means that there are more options open for people who are doing work that would be, non-academic, but also could be related to craft, and maybe that this could find funding sources. Do you see this as again, another possible silver lining, that there would be federal, God forbid, or public funding for craft-based education?
Well, I do think you are seeing that. We'll have to see. Again, we're not even 100 days in. Yeah, but in the first Trump administration, there was something of an emphasis on apprenticeship programs and broadening apprenticeship programs. Not all apprenticeship programs are necessarily craft or artisan, but it is basically a craft. And so I do think that there is some impetus toward more industries embracing the apprenticeship type program. Whether the funding is behind it right now, I don't see it. And whether it will emerge, I don't know. But I think there has been a shift in recognizing the value of apprenticeship programs, and that we need to have that kind of option more deeply embedded into the US economy. Whether we actually see it is an open question at this point in time.
Can you leave me with some final thoughts as our time runs out? I would love to hear. I want to keep going but I know everybody needs to go home. So any final thoughts that you have about where we stand right now, what we can do as a community, as a craft-based community, to see through these times?
Well, I'll just start off. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Chris. Go
No,
ahead.
I was just going to start off, and I think the one of the most important things here is to be active to reach out for mutual support, mutual knowledge sharing, conversations about pricing, conversations about sourcing, that the kind of conversation that we're had here for the people, that's intensely invaluable.
I wanted to just say that there's been a lively
So I
conversation
think
going on in the chat. So for those who are attending, they can see what each other is saying, and then you will also, panelists, have access to that. I can't communicate it all to you, but it has sparked quite a lively conversation. I want to thank all of you for being part of this discussion. I want to thank the American Craft Council, the Furniture Society, and the Craft Emergency Relief Fund for hosting it. And thanks to everyone who joined us today. Hopefully we can continue this conversation sometime in the near future as things evolve. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Thanks so much.
Thank you.